good day, and welcome to the Welsh Wire. We are so glad that you joined us today. We are doing our podcast today in collaboration with our friends at the Family Business Alliance in Grand Rapids. We're so glad to partner with them and have as our special guest today, John Ruther, who's the managing director of OKeefe, West Michigan. OKeefe and John's firm are underwriters for the Family Business Alliance, and we're so glad to have John here today. John, welcome to the Welsh Wire.
Oh, thanks, Sheri. Really happy to be here today.
We're talking about right-sizing risk. And if you've been listening to our podcast for a while, you know this is an ongoing series that we've been doing this year with the Family Business Alliance. This is a year like no other. What can we say? 2020's rolled into 2021. You know, it's been challenging, and there's been a lot of issues around financial risk and risk mitigation that's really kind of come to the forefront of a lot of business owners' minds. And all our financial discussions are really around this right now. There's still so many uncertainties, right, John? I mean,
Yeah, obviously, we're not exactly sure what's going to be happening, almost on a day-to-day basis still.
right. The future is still pretty cloudy. So, the question remains moving through into 2021, what can we do about right-sizing risk? And John's got some really great information, what we'd like to think are some very valuable lessons, right, John, about how to right-size your risk as a business, really getting up to that 10,000 foot view and looking at all the things that you might need to be considering to mitigate risk. So before we get into that, let's learn a little bit more about John. John, share with us a brief history of OKeefe and tell us a little bit about your background and your background with the company too.
Sure. So O'Keefe's been in business since 2000. Pat O'Keefe over in the Metro Detroit area started everything up. We are what I would call a highly specialized financial transaction firm. So we get involved in anything from, say, mezzanine debt. We run a fund called the Grow Michigan 2 Fund. We get involved in turnaround management. We're also in litigation support, so helping attorneys understand what, from a financial aspect, are maybe damages, things of that sort. And then we also do investment banking, so we're involved in a lot of M&A deals. And then we do some strategic advisory too. So O'Keefe has locations in West Michigan, has locations in Metro Detroit, and also in Phoenix. And we have a nationwide reach. So it's really a nice place to be, and just a great group of people who have a wealth of knowledge and background in finance and really running businesses, including myself.
Right. Yes, so, really valuable resources for family businesses in West Michigan. And you're a pretty new underwriter to Family Business Alliance too.
Yeah, this is our first year involved, and we're really excited about it. I have a little bit of a background in family business. Really, since I've been growing up, my entire family has run different businesses, and sometimes together, sometimes separately, but learned a lot of valuable lessons within those family businesses. And it's nice to carry those over to O'Keefe and actually be able to see it maybe from a little bit of a different side. Take the experience, but then also take that financial information that we bring and say, wow, if I could have only applied that 20 years ago.
Oh, of course. I know. And that perspective is so rich, right? I mean, I shared that same perspective that you have from a family business. I grew up with parents who ran a family business. I run a family business today. And I think that really does give us a little bit different perspective, right? As we talk with family business owners, because we have literally walked in their shoes.
Yeah. And even right now, my wife runs a business with my daughter and my son-in-law. So
there you go.
I get to give advice to them, but since it's within the family, I'm not sure they listen to me all the time, but it's still pretty good.
Well, there's that, right? There's that. Yeah. And John, you and I were talking earlier, and we found out we're both Chippewas, graduates of Central Michigan University, which is another cool thing we have in common. You got it, fire up chips. And we also learned that we are not going to jointly sing the fight song because one of us knows it and one of us doesn't. So we'll just leave that. We'll just let that lie. But yeah, we've got some fun common backgrounds that we can talk from. But you're really the expert when it comes to mitigating risk, not me. And we want to hear from you today more about that. So can you start us out with just kind of giving us an overview, John? Let's talk about the economy, because from a risk viewpoint, that sort of sets the table for what we're dealing with right now, what we might need to be concerned about. And then I know you've got strategies to talk about too, but tell us about the state of the economy as you see it today.
Yeah, so obviously, with the economy right now, it's in what I would call that uncertain state, right? Which has gone ahead and caused some risk factors that people hadn't considered, previously. I think really since the first time in many of our lives, really probably going back to World War II, we hadn't seen something like what we saw last year with some government intervention. We ended up seeing obviously some social changes that maybe we haven't seen that kind of cultural type issues since maybe the 1960s. And
Right.
so we really ended up getting some impact of things that I would call macro environmental, beyond our control, that we're still trying to sort out. Okay, are these going to be the way that things move in the future? Is this something that's just temporary? And I think we're seeing some sea changes out there where, there's definitely some pieces in there that are going to make their way, into our lives and our businesses from now on. So
Right.
that's probably the big piece that I think came out of it was maybe a step back in society from looking at just financial risk to taking a look at that bigger risk and taking a look at those macro environmental, economic, environmental, social, and governance type changes.
Right, right. And you describe it well, calling it a sea change. That's really what it was. I mean, the pandemic just changed so much about the way we do business, and the things that we didn't think would impact our businesses, never considered would. They never did before. As you mentioned, some of those social changes, which we haven't seen since the 1960s. And candidly, I mean, most of us as business owners were not around owning businesses in the 1960s. So
Right. Yeah.
this is a whole new world, right? For many of
Correct.
us.
Yeah.
So you've got that sea change that's happening as a result of the pandemic. You talk about the fact that financial risk sort of came secondary. So
Yeah.
almost like an afterthought.
And really, and it was more of people trying to understand how that risk maybe came financially. For forever, we've had economic indicators, right? Unemployment, things of that sort, and that triggers or signals to society. Hey, here's what from the investment bank side of things or the investment side of things. People saying, "Aha." There's some sort of change that's going on. Risk is either increasing or decreasing. But what we didn't have was from that, environmental slash social slash government, that wasn't really built into it. But what you're seeing now is that even credit analysts, I think 85% of credit analysts say that they have an ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance. They have some factors that they look at when they're determining whether or not you're going to be able to raise capital. So from investment standpoint, if you're maybe a PE firm looking to acquire one of these family businesses, or if your bank is looking to give you an additional loan. So it's being quantified now, and so it's actually turning into maybe some financial risks that somebody can go ahead and quantify.
That's interesting in a way that they never really considered
Right.
as strongly before. I mean, maybe they considered it in a small way, but not as strongly as they do today.
And they're really looking for the family businesses now to have at least considered in their strategic planning that they're addressing these things. Okay, how am I impacting the environment? Whether you have something saying I'm going to be doing something that's going to change the way I do it, or just having it addressed. They want you to say, hey, I've taken a look at this. Same thing on, how are you going to work with maybe to potential new government regulations, things of that sort.
Right. So interesting. So interesting. And yet you also mentioned that, we're looking over the horizon and it's cloudy and there's still a lot of unknowns.
Right.
So for as much as we're maybe better understanding what some of the sea changes are and what the implications are for us, the future is still a little cloudy. Talk about that a little bit, will you, John?
Well, from a risk standpoint, yeah, the future is cloudy, right? But there's some things that you can do internally to, keep the value up on your company. So
Yeah,
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 addressing this ESG, taking a look, making sure that you're seeing what's going on. Obviously, it's important to look at current events, but then looking back into your own business. Um, One of the things that you can do is tighten up your own financials, right? So take a look, get your accounting in order, right? As you're doing that, and just to give you an example, I
mhm,
was working with one family business where they just did a fantastic job. They were bringing in good cash flow. They had great margins. They had fantastic intellectual property and all the things that you always hear about from a risk standpoint. They had addressed. They had all the customers that you can think of. It wasn't too concentrated. All those other things, but their financials or their accounting was just awful.
ugh,
And what ended up happening is when they went to get bought, they should have been at almost a $5 million sale, but due to the fact that when the due diligence started, and there were several companies that tried to buy it, when they got in there and started to take a look, and all of a sudden there started to be some questions about whether or not these financial statements were actually reasonable,
mhm.
and some of the things couldn't be proven out. All of a sudden that dropped down to when the a couple of times people pulled out, and a couple of times people came back with offers. It was only about half. So
Wow.
just tightening up your financials and making sure that somebody can see 3 to 5 years of really good solid financials that you can't poke holes in.
Right.
It turns out to be just a thing that's really valuable to the business.
Oh, I would imagine so. That's great advice. So, so important to do that. You also talk about the risk of a lot of knowledge being centralized in one individual in
Sure.
the operation. Tell us more
And,
about that.
yeah, and you see that in a lot of family businesses, right?
Sure.
The founder has a lot of knowledge. Obviously, they started it. They have a lot of charisma. They know the customers. They know the suppliers. They know the business really well. And in a lot of cases, you'll see that the people who work for or work within that company look to that person to make all those decisions.
That's right.
So when it comes time to look to either pass it on or exit, or um, taking a look at even expanding customer base, et cetera,
Right.
it turns out it's that person that is the reason that the business is so successful. So it's really important for you to start to pass that information on to somebody else, so that yeah, when somebody comes in maybe from the outside to buy your business, they look and say, aha, if I buy this, there's good management people in place. It's not just the owner who may be exiting in a year or two, even if I have them stay on. So
Right. Oh, that's so true. And just recently I was working with a client who identified risk even down one more level. So to go a little bit more micro on this, sometimes even individual contributors, if they are the only one that can do that job function and it is critical to getting work out the door or to
yeah,
doing what you need to take care of for your client and your customers, the loss of that individual from the company opens up great risk. Our client identified that, which was one of the reasons we were brought into the conversation, right? To try to find another person to shore that up. But even down another level from the leadership team, there can be key people on the team that if you lose that one individual, you could be sunk for a
oh
while.
yeah,
You
and I've
might not
seen
be able
that.
to get work out the door.
I've seen that in the supply chain thing where
Yeah.
the business had, where the person who was really doing the purchasing had created an entire system, obviously had all the relationships too, but had created this entire system using I think it was Microsoft Excel. But anyways, when they left, nobody knew how to use that. And yeah, it ended up being several months before they were able to get their arms around the whole thing. So,
Yeah, that's a problem. That
yeah,
is a
right. Yeah,
problem.
exactly.
Yeah. You also talk about budgeting and planning as being something that needs to be examined. Tell us more about that, John.
Yeah, obviously, when you're running a business, if you can forecast what's going to end up happening, it's really valuable. So you're taking a forward look. You don't necessarily want your accounting department to just be giving you historical information
No,
either. So
no.
if you're taking those forward looks, that can add value. And I'll give you just an example. So I was with a company for 20 years. I had made my way up to the C level in the company. We grew quite a bit. And here we were. I had started with them when they were 400 million. They ended up being 800 million.
Mm,
And we had never done a budget in the entire history of the company. Been around since 1926. Here we are sitting in, I think it was 2002, and we'd never done a budget. Yeah, people are
wow.
saying, hey, we want to grow this much this year, reduce expenses this much, and, let's make sure we're collecting our receivables on time, something like that.
Yeah.
And we were probably the most profitable business within the industry.
Mhm.
But what
And
ended
quite
up
by
happening,
accident, what might we add, right? Quite by accident, because there was really no planning that went into that, right?
well, no real official planning, right? So, anyways, we get a new CFO in, and that CFO goes ahead and puts in a budgeting planning thing, and we're all really competitive people, so we want to win at everything we do,
Right.
and puts in the budget. And this isn't one of these budgets where, hey, you know, I said I was going to spend $3,000 on supplies this year, and I only spent 2,500. So next year I can only spend 2,500. Not something like that, but just actually holding you to, hey, I know my business. Well, we ended up 3 years later, after really getting this in place, and we're all pretty proud of ourselves of, hey, we're hitting these budgets, and they're going to where they need to be. And we're hitting projections, and you see this in Wall Street, right? You got to hit your projections. But
Yep.
anyways, we're hitting our projections. We're an ESOP, so twice a year we're sending in our financials to somebody who's going to do a valuation. I
Yep.
mean, I'm an ABV now, so I do valuations, but at the time I had no idea how they did these valuations. So we send it in, and we're at 71 bucks a share, which was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And we thought, well, we're going to go to 75. This is just based on what we think. And it came back, and it was 85 bucks a share.
Oh,
We were
wow.
like, how did it get to $85 a share? Well, what turned out is when we started talking to the valuation people, they said, well, for all these years, you never gave us projections. We didn't really know that you knew what you were doing. But after 2 or 3 years of you guys hitting this, we understood. So we removed a risk factor that we always had in there, and that bumped you up. You always should have been, you know, $5 to $10 higher than what we valued you at. And it was like,
Wow.
oh my goodness. And that was kind of when the light bulb went off
You
on
bet.
you should really be looking at doing forecasting and budgeting.
Oh, that's a great story. Really hits home, I'm sure, for a lot of family businesses. Yeah, that's a great, great story. And with a wonderful ending, too. Wow. Terrific lesson.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about relationships, John. You mentioned that relationships can really be a risk factor for companies too. Tell us what you mean by that.
Yeah, definitely creating strong relationships is important. West Michigan, that's kind of what we're built on anyways.
Mhm.
But yeah, having those strong relationships with your suppliers, maybe with your bankers, things of that sort. When something comes around, if you're communicating with them, if you've got a good relationship, if that trust is built there, you're going to get some additional help, some additional uh, effort from
Yeah.
those folks that maybe you wouldn't get before. And I'll give you an example, and it goes both ways too. So, for example, the company I was with that I was telling you about, we had a really good relationship with Bear Paint, the folks that do the paints at Home Depot, right? So
Yep.
we had a really good relationship with them, but we ended up in a situation that's not too dissimilar than what's happening right now. So in petrochemicals, you're seeing force majeure, where people just can't meet contracts due to a lack of supply.
Yeah.
Well, we were in a situation back when Katrina was going on that was going to cause, and it wasn't going to be a huge delay, but we were about to delay Bear Paint from actually being able to supply Home Depot.
Oh,
And we were
wow.
only going to be maybe a half a day late. But because we had those relationships, we decided we'd bend over backwards for them. We went out to the local Home Depots around where we had to make the deliveries, and we ended up buying pallets worth of paint that was already on the shelves and delivering it back to Home Depot or not to Home Depot, but delivering it back to Behr Paint so that Behr could deliver it back to Home Depot and not miss out on anything. Not that that's the story that you're going to hear from everyone, but there's all sorts of stories out there like that where when you're in those kinds of situations, that trust level helps. Now,
yeah,
obviously some of that is going to be just beyond anybody's control.
Yeah.
But as much as you can get done is really helpful.
Right. Oh, for sure. For sure. And, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I know another thing that you like to talk about is that whole ESG, that environmental, social, governmental aspect of risk, and really paying attention to that in a way that you maybe never have before.
Yeah. And I would say that you're starting to see within the middle market too. I think I did something not too long ago where over 50% of the middle market is adopting that. But yeah, that actually goes back to your supply chains and your relationships, because farther up the food chain too, a lot of the big suppliers, a lot of the big customers of yours are starting to take these into account. And so, it's a good thing to look out and see some standards that are out there. Even talk to your customers or to your suppliers if you're going to get something going, where they can help you to implement at least something from a strategic standpoint that will help you and make it easier by talking to somebody who's already been through it.
Right. For sure. These are great areas that you have highlighted here. And, the reason we look at this is because we all care about the value of our business, whether we're going to run it ourselves as, first generation or second generation, now generation, as we sometimes refer to it at Family Business Alliance, or whether we're getting ready to, pass it down to the family members, or whether we're looking to sell it. I mean, we all have hopes of sustaining our business in a very healthy manner going forward. So talk to us a little bit about those effects of mitigating risk or not mitigating risk on the value and even on M&A situations.
Yeah. So, really, as we're talking about from an M&A situation, from a, raising funds situation, if you've got these things that we talked about in order, right? Maybe you're talking about the ESG, maybe you're talking about your financials, maybe you've done this forecasting, you're going to know your story a lot better. Everybody knows their story really well, but you're going to know it a lot better from, maybe some things that are important to either somebody who's acquiring, or like I say, maybe you're going to need to get some assets because you're growing, right? So it's that raising capital. It's potentially exiting, like you were saying, having those things in place. You do go ahead and add that value, because as the M&A comes in or somebody's doing their due diligence, they're starting to add risk into, beyond your risk-free rate that you get from the yield, right, from the treasuries, beyond what you're looking at from the stock market. They're looking at the company risk. And as they start adding that risk up, that discounts your, your company. So if they say, well, gee, we think it's, risky enough to make it an additional 25%. Well, that lowers the value of your company by 25%. So you don't want to have that happen. You want to make it as tight as possible so that when these things come about, that you're ready for them. And you're seeing out there a lot of what's known as dry powder, or funds that aren't being invested right now. So there's a lot of buyers out there, and there's a lot of things going on with banks right now where, there was cash penned up that they want to get out and they want to be able to spend. So as if you can show that you've got that value, people that are valuable or businesses that are valuable are going to get funded.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So looking forward, for our listeners today who are saying, great, I've got some ideas of things I need to look at, but, give us a few takeaways. What are some of your recommendations, John, for things that listeners can put into practice right now today, to really get their hands around this?
Yeah. So to really get your hands around it, I would say that it's important to have good financial management inside of your company. And obviously, I come from that industry, so I've got a bias. But it's really good to have somebody that you can rely on that will help guide you and take and interpret the financial data that you're getting out of your business right now. Yeah, sometimes we get stuck in the weeds as business owners, and we're all looking at how are we going to get the next deal. We're looking at how do we take care of the customer. We're wanting to make sure that everybody gets the best value that they can out of what we're doing for them. But then we kind of forget to take a look and say, well, gee, what is our own information telling us? And yeah, don't just look at historical. As we started talking about with the with the forecasting, yeah, take a look at how can I make that change, and then monitor and put in some metrics to see and give yourself some goals that way. And I know a lot of people do that. It's just kind of reiterating or reinforcing that.
Right, for sure. As a business owner and a business leader, we struggle with the whole concept of working in the business versus working on the business, right?
Right.
Like
Yeah,
you say,
yeah.
we get down in the weeds, and sometimes we need to pull ourselves back up and really work on the business. And right sizing risk is all about working on the business to
Right.
protect that value and create value for the future too, regardless of what that means, whether it's passing to the next generation or if it does mean some M&A
Right.
activity.
Yeah, and like you say, create value for the future, because what is, finance itself is there to fund value. That's
Yeah,
really the whole thing. And
you said
obviously,
it.
if something's not valuable anymore, then there's not a need for it. So
Right.
as long as you're keeping it valuable, then that makes all the sense in the world.
It sure does. It sure does. John, if our listeners want to get in touch with you, you're so knowledgeable. I mean, you really know this. You live this every day at OKeefe. If they want to reach out to you with some questions, more insight, or maybe want to see what OKeefe can do to help them, how can they get in touch with you, John?
Yeah, so if you want to take a look at the overall firm, you can go ahead and go to www.OKeefellc.com. So OKeefellc.com. And you can look at our website from there. If you want to get a hold of me, give me a call. My office is 616-233-8080. And yes, I'm in the office. Or
Wonderful.
you can call me on my cell phone, 616-550-9415. You want to get a hold of me via email, it's jruther, the letter J, then RUTHER @OKeefellc.com. So all
Awesome.
sorts of ways to get a hold of me or anybody in the firm. We love helping people.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. And your suggestions today have been spot on, really, really helpful. And we really appreciate you being our guest.
Well, thanks. I appreciate being on. And yeah, like I say, fire up chips, and you can go ahead and sing the fight song if you'd like.
Oh, yeah, that'd be a way to close, wouldn't it? Oh, my goodness. John, it's been a delight talking with you again. Our guest today has been John Ruther, the Managing Director at OKeefe, West Michigan. John, thanks again for your time.
Oh, thanks so much. Appreciate it, Sheri.